So in my last video, I shared a super easy jelly recipe that is made with store-bought juice. It is a great recipe for someone who is brand new to the idea of canning, or maybe they've never canned before. Using store-bought juice, you cannot get much easier than that. It was for pomegranate jelly. And so if you would like to see that recipe, I will put a link to that down below. Now, the recipe that I'm doing today is very similar to the one that I did yesterday. However, I would not recommend this one for brand new canners simply because it's a little touchy. It's delicious and it's very different. This one uses, instead of juice as the main ingredient, it uses wine. And I used a Cabernet Sauvignon, if that's how you even say that. I can never say it right. But it's a red wine that's kind of a semi-sweet, and I think it gives this jelly an amazing flavor. Now, the part about it that is tricky is with most jellies or jams, you bring the liquid up to a rolling boil, which lets your pectin activate, and then that pectin thickens up the liquid into a jelly. If you boil the wine for this recipe, it actually alters the flavor and it can make it bitter. And so with this one, you do it a little bit differently. First of all, you use a liquid pectin, not a powder. This is not a recipe that can be swapped over to a powder version. Many recipes can be done with either or if you know the steps for doing that. And I actually have an article on my website where I explain how you can substitute powdered pectin for liquid or vice versa. They are not just directly interchangeable. You can't just use the same recipe or the same steps with either. You have to know the proper steps, and so I will put a link to that down below as well if you would like to read up on that. But this recipe, because you do not boil the wine, you do not want to use powder because it's never going to properly dissolve. And so you do have to use the liquid pectin for this recipe. Now, like I said, I used a Cabernet Sauvignon with this recipe. It's kind of a semi-sweet sort of wine. Now, while I'm using a Cabernet Sauvignon for this, you could actually use just about any other kind of wine to substitute and make all sorts of different flavors of the wine jelly. And this is actually a great way to take a wine that's maybe given to you or that you purchase and you realize it is way too dry for you to consume. This is a way you can convert it over into something usable so that that wine doesn't go to waste. Of course, you could also use it in a roast or in some kind of stew or something like that. That's generally what I will do the most often when I get because I personally do not like dry wines. They are just not my cup of tea. And so anytime I get a wine that's a little bit too dry for me, I just save it in the refrigerator and I use it for recipes. But this is one of those recipes you could definitely use some of that wine for. So this recipe only uses 3 ingredients. It uses the red wine, the sugar, and pectin. So you're going to start off with 4 cups of the wine and you're going to pour it into a non-reactive pot. And to that, you're going to add 6 cups of granulated sugar. And you're going to begin heating this up, and you're going to stir it continually until the sugar is completely dissolved, until the wine mixture is very, very hot. But you want to stop it right before it begins to boil. Now, if you're using a full-bodied, dark-colored wine, like a red wine, you may not be able to see the bottom of the pot. If you're using a white wine or a rosé, then you would be able to see down through there and see the bottom of your pot. And when it gets to the stage that it's beginning to form bubbles on the bottom of the pot and almost about to boil, that is when you want to turn off the heat and don't let it come to a complete boil. Again, this recipe has sort of a magic spot, and if you don't quite get it hot enough, your jelly isn't going to gel. But if you let it boil, it may change the flavor of your wine and it may not taste very good. So that's why I don't recommend this for a beginning canner, because if it doesn't turn out right, then they may be discouraged and not want to can, and I don't ever want that to happen. I want to encourage people to can, not to discourage them. So once that wine and sugar mixture gets super, super hot, it is on the verge of boiling, you turn off the heat and you immediately pour in 2 pouches of liquid pectin. And you're just going to stir and stir and stir until that pectin is completely mixed into the wine mixture, and then you're going to jar it up into 1/2 pint jars. Now you could also do this in the smaller 1/4 pint jars if you wanted to. This recipe makes about 7 1/2 pint jars, and there's usually a little bit left over, and so I filled 7 1/2 pint jars along with one of the little bitty 1/4 cup 4-ounce jars. Now you want this mixture to stay nice and hot, so you should already have your jars heated up in your canner, and ladle that mixture into jars that are already hot. And you're going to ladle it up to 1/4 inch of headspace, which is the distance between the top of the jelly to the top of the jar. Then you'll take a damp cloth that is dipped in white vinegar and wipe the rims of your jars. That way you don't have any kind of residue that would hinder your jar lids from sealing. You'll put on a lid and a ring and put the jar into the canner, and do that with all of your jelly mixture. Now this is a high acid food, so you would process it in either a hot water bath canner or a steam canner like the one you see me using here. And whichever one you use, the processing time is 10 minutes for both the 1/2 pint jars and the 1/4 pint jars. Once your jars are done processing, turn off the heat, remove the lid of your canner, let the jars rest there for about 5 minutes, and then transfer them over to a lined surface that is in a draft-free location, and let them sit for 12 to 24 hours. I usually just let them sit overnight. And then the next day, I remove the rings. I test the seals of all the jars by simply lifting up the whole jar with the lid, because if it is sealed, that lid will just pop right off, and then that jar would have to go into the fridge to be used. Now, like I said, this jelly can be a little bit touchy as far as getting it to just that magic temperature for the jelly to firm up. Now, even if it doesn't firm up all the way, it is still going to thicken up, and it would still be an amazing topping for steak or burgers or any kind of meat that you would want some sort of red wine sauce. You could even melt it and put it on a glaze for barbecue. I mean, you can use this for all sorts of stuff. Like I mentioned in my pomegranate jelly video yesterday, jelly can be used for so much more than just toast. There's so many more uses for it. As a matter of fact, I have a couple barbecue sauce recipes on my website that use jellies as part of the flavoring for those sauces, and I'll put a link to those down below as well. Now, with other jellies and jams, not this wine one where you can't bring it up to a boil, if you have your jelly or jam not set, there is a way to possibly save it and reprocess it to make it set. And I have an article where I thoroughly explain that on my website. I'll put a link to that down below. It's not a guarantee that it'll set up, but it's a good chance that you might be able to rescue it and get your nice thick jelly or jam after all. But worst case scenario, if it doesn't set up, you've got amazing syrup for pancakes or waffles or whatever, ice cream. I mean, just if your jelly or jam doesn't set up, it's not the end of the world. Just label it syrup and nobody will know the difference. I also want to mention that because this jelly does not come up to a boil that is sustained in any way, there is still alcohol in this jelly. And so this is not something that I would serve to children on their toast or muffins or anything like that. So if you would like to make this recipe for the red wine jelly, I have a printable version of it on my website. I will put a link to that down below. Thanks for hanging out with me here again in the Homestead Kitchen. Talk to you all next time.